All right, guys, thanks for joining us today to our monthly Friday Live. Friday Live is a meetup group that is hosted by us at Delfs Engineering and FM BetterForms, but we try not to have pure FM BetterForms content. It's not a thing for promoting that, but it's actually for our real goal here is to build or promote better development. So we're going to start off today. We got a slightly different format. One of the main differences we have some different features. We'll touch base on what's new in our product, and then we'll jump into our technique corner, and then we have a couple really neat features I think that you'll enjoy. So I want to start off with our roadmap and where we are and what's happening in BetterForms. A couple things we're going to be introducing is BetterForms workshops. So I'm excited about those. Those are going to be a one-to-many type classroom type environment. We will pick a predefined, pre-built kind of birdhouse type project, and some of those projects will be things like a smart link to a client, and then the client gets a smart link, it retrieves some data from FileMaker, they populate some more data, and that gets submitted. Other projects are like a support group or support inbox where you can have, say, a link in your FileMaker application. You click on that, that opens something up with the context of the user. The user fills out some information, maybe uploads some things, and then that gets sent back into FileMaker, plus they can see a history of that. So those kinds of projects. That's also, you do not have to have a subscription for those. Those are going to come with a free 2-page test drive subscription, so we'll be opening that up at the same time. So that's what's new with that, with workshops. We're working on, we touched base in the last 2 meetups on our what you see is what you get editor, so that's still in progress and we're on track with that. We have some really nice designs. We're working out some different types of, not so much the technical problems, but the UI problems. That's something that Pearson and I are actively working on. I'm not going to demonstrate, maybe if we have time later on, I'll demonstrate where we're at with that, but we're not going to get into it too much. And then I want to touch base on a few other things on our roadmap here. We just recently pushed out an update, an interim update to our testing or staging editor, and I'll show you what that looks like here. Let me just find a project that I can safely open. A couple of different things we've changed. We've changed some of the way the navigation works, and the main goal here, and Pearson can address this maybe a little bit more detail later on, but the main goal here is we've added this breadcrumb idea. Christina has built this this widget at the top here, and if I jump into these different, there is a known issue here, so we'll just glance over that with the staging build. But you can see that there's this breadcrumbs. We have a much better idea of where we are within the application. And now we can jump in, and that will continue. We'll eventually show you how we built this, because it's pretty neat. It's all dynamic and it's all driven actually off the URL. So because the URL is namespaced, the breadcrumbs are namespaced as well. So that's a big change to the editor. We've changed that. You see this, the side navigation has changed. This will be changing again soon over the next 3 months, quite a bit different as we change this entire interface. So that's pretty exciting. The workshops I mentioned already, we're continuing with our improved error support. You'll start to see that emerge in BF staging probably over the next month or so. It's still in development right now. And what we're really doing is there's a number of errors that can happen in a system. So we're learning by using it ourselves, which errors that we want to flag, which ones we want to kind of quietly let pass on, and which ones we want to stop, to fail very loudly. Graphic user interface page builder I mentioned already, and some in-app optimizations coming up. We have a few things that are going to be in the works. One of the ones that we just started this week is an in-app notification system. This will be an alert system that will sit within the application, so that when you log in, if we have messages, the messages will appear over here, plus we can send out announcements like service announcements and those kinds of things. So that's some stuff that's coming up within the application itself. And I want to jump onto our technique corner. And this week we have two techniques. One is from Pearson and one is from Christina. And maybe we can jump to Christina's first, and it's about scrolling to errors. This is something that came up this week a few times, I think, on the forum. So we figured we'd address it a little bit. And Christine, you can share away when you're ready.
So I'm gonna be demoing how to scroll to errors. I apologize, I think I'm a bit congested. I've been sick for the whole 2 weeks. My voice is still really bad, but I'm gonna get through this. Let's see. So I've got a bunch of inputs, and I have one input that is required. I don't want this one to be empty, but then my user would be like all the way at the bottom when they click the validate button. And if it's empty, I want it to scroll back up here. And we can do this pretty easily. For my input, I've got, I'm going to zoom in, a required true and a validator required. And then down where my button is, over here. Where my button is, I've got the action validate, which will run the validating. And then in my on failed actions, I've got an alert and then the scroll to snippet. The element I'm targeting is the class.errors. And in the options, I've got a duration of 500, ease, and an offset of -100. If I remove the offset, you'll see it's useful. Doesn't get all the way up there without the offset, so a -100 was super useful. And another thing I should point out is you can also scroll within containers, and there's one more line to add to get this. So this is a container with a fixed height, and you can scroll to the middle. You can do some transitions with this library also. In here, I'm gonna left click inspect and hover over this just so you can see what it looks like. The whole box is a height 64 with an overflow scroll. And I've got the ID demo1 container here.
So Christina, this would be something like if we had some type of terms and conditions, and maybe there's 3 checkboxes buried into those terms and conditions. You could have the user, when they hit the button possibly at the bottom of the screen, you want them to actually go ahead and acknowledge all 3 of these different parts. It could scroll up to that first part or the middle part and so on. Is that right?
Yeah, for sure. So this is like within your page, it'd be somewhere that's a specific container that you want to scroll. And the element that you target within the container is going to also have an ID. And this one is called demo1 middle. And in the button, for the middle button, I've got the element demo1 middle with the hashtag to target the ID. And in the options, I have a container with demo1 container. And for all the buttons, the container is the same. It's just the element that changed for where you want to scroll to. So it's done super easy. And for a note, you can't have the container if you want to scroll the entire page. It'll mess things up. Yep, that's really it for this.
Christina, could we see the JSON again? Could you go back to the schema for a quick sec? So this takes advantage, this technique takes advantage of a new feature we added approximately a year and a half ago to the validate action. For people who don't use BetterForms, actions are like script steps in FileMaker, the equivalent. So the script step to validate the page, right there at line 115, when that fails, normally what happens is validation, if everything validates on the page, it's permissive, so the next action runs. But when it fails, we now can run other actions, in other words, like perform another script, if you will, to do things. And in this case, Christine is showing an, excuse me, showing an alert and then scrolling to that errors element. You don't have to add the errors element yourself. BetterForms already does that. So that's when you see that red alert, that actually has a class on it already. So we're just scrolling to the first one that's there. So that's kind of a neat technique. Somebody had asked that on the forum. Did you manage to, whoever, I think was it you, Dallas, or somebody else maybe?
Yeah,
I think it was me.
Right. And did you get that resolved?
Yes, it did. Yeah. Thank you
super.
to the team.
So that's a nice technique. Thank you, Christine. Is that available as an example?
yes, it is available as an example, both pages.
Perfect. Thank you. One thing that we are going to be doing is we have the apparatus, but we had to deploy some of the UI to support this. Is our example pages are now going to have a corresponding forum post where we can accumulate history or conversation about that. One of the rocks or major projects for one of our team, Michael, this next quarter is he's going to be building an integration between Slack and our forum post. We're having some really great conversations on our Slack group. And I know it's a pain to go into the forum because it feels like it's going to take forever because it takes more than 30 seconds to get a response. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a button, basically an integration where we can take an existing thread in the forum, in Slack, and then instantly push that into the forum and continue the conversation live there. So I think that's going to be a nice bonus for support. All right, super. Thank you, Christine. Next we have Pearson.
Hey, good morning, guys. So I was actually inspired to try out a segment like this, just giving some tips and tricks with about UX and UI. I was inspired because one of our users, Dylan, Dallas, asked me about it earlier this week. He asked for some tips about UX, and so I went back and looked at some old resources that I've used while working here, or some resources I've used while I was back in school. So I want to share those with you guys because I think they're really useful tools to have, and they break down what UX means and what UI can do to help your product. It breaks them down really well. So I'm going to share my screen and go through a couple of these tools. So the first one is checklist design, and I'll actually I'll share these in the chat if anybody would like to follow along. This first one, checklist.design, is just a way for me to quickly go over certain pages and elements and make sure that I'm not missing any of the basic requirements. So for example, something like a login page, something that most, if not all of our sites and apps will need. You can easily just check to say, okay, so on my login page, do I have my logo? Do I have a title? And some bonus items that you might want, maybe showing the password requirements, being able to log in with the third party. All of these items are just some really simple basic needs that these pages will require. And they even have like some example images here. You can check them out and just to get some inspiration of what do other pages like this look like. Am I missing anything that people might be expecting to see? So that's for login pages. They also have just some of these common pages that people might have. There's also the elements that people might be using, like a badge or an avatar. Let's see about navigation, for example. Just making sure that you have visual contrast to the rest of the page, a consistent location so that the users know exactly where to look to navigate through your site at all times. And some more inspiration here. Usually all connects back to Drupal, which is, as a side note, another good place to find some inspiration for UX and UI. So that is checklist.design, super powerful. I use it a lot and I highly recommend it. Another site that I use is UXToast. I haven't used this in a while, but this is kind of where I learned some of the basics of UX principles and UI design principles. I think it's really great you can go to their site and check out their UX design, UI design, their own articles or some articles that they've posted, I think here. What I really like is their UI design segments. For example, the Gestalt principles of UI design. And this really breaks down part of the psychology of what a user might be thinking when they look at whatever is being presented on their screen. So for example, the law of proximity basically states that items that are closer together are naturally grouped together in our heads. So for example, here, it's a very small difference, but you can see on the left side, the name and the input box are close together, and there's a little extra bit of separation between this box and the next one. Whereas on the right side, you'll see that they're all evenly spaced, which in some cases might be confusing. If you have a long list of things, you might not be sure if the email address is referring to the one above it or the one below it. So just this general principle of keeping things grouped separately, the proximity that certain elements are within each other could have an effect on how it's perceived. Another one, the law of common region, basically saying that if something is grouped and is bordered by something, it is much more obvious that it is all related. Another one, law of similarity. They're just using an example here of, having some consistency in your design, just knowing that if something is similar, then it is probably related. In this case, buttons, your primary buttons, your secondary buttons, your tertiary buttons, they're all following a similar design principle, being, blue, similar text. Anybody looking at this will be able to infer that all three of those are buttons, but can also tell at the same time that those buttons are not all equal, but that they're still interactive and stuff like that. So that's UXToast, and they have some other articles based about UX principles. Maybe I'll go through a couple of those.
This is pretty cool.
Yeah. So just a couple of these UX laws. There's not a ton, but it's a really great way to kind of jump into the world of UX. So really quickly, this isolation effect, the von Restorff effect, states that users are more likely to remember an object if it is visually different from similar objects. Very simple stuff, but still very useful information that I think a lot of people would benefit from.
So would an example of that be like a round help button or something that sort of stands out that's different in shape? Or
yeah, it could be. Let's see what they use as an example. If you want a user to remember something, make it stand out. So, okay, so I immediately, what I think of, without even reading the rest of it, I'm imagining this get started button here. It stands out, it's different, it's the only thing, one of the only two things that are highlighted in red. And there we go. On the Netflix homepage, there are only 3 clickable elements on the screen: the Netflix logo, the sign in button, and the search feature. So just these 3, the sign in, the logo up here,
and the call to action being the most dominant one.
Exactly, yeah. So just that principle of making things stand out seems obvious, but at least now you know that there is a reason that these sites are designed this way, and you can take a look at that if you want. Another one, this is probably one of the most powerful or useful resources out there right now. It's from Nielsen and Norman Group. I'll send this as well. Now, Nielsen and Norman are basically, you could call them the founders of usable websites or usable web pages. And they've been in this industry since the beginning. They pretty much were the ones who created this idea that when web pages were being developed for the first time, they realized that they have to be usable. And so how can we make them usable? How can we make sure that people are able to, or that anybody is able to access our websites? So they have a lot of articles. They have a lot of training and consulting, a lot of things on the site, but I find that the articles and some of their more popular articles are very important to familiarize yourself with. And so, for example, the 10 usability heuristics of user interface design is what they're best known for. And these are basically just some foundational principles that or rules of thumb that follow usability guidelines. And so, for example, I like this one, number 2, matching the system with the real world. And so that's basically creating or keeping in mind when you're designing for an interface. Remember that there are similarities between the digital world and the online world. And if you can merge those similarities together, or at least make the user familiar with your website based on the real world, that helps a lot. So just using real life examples, or sorry, real life principles in your design can help make people understand certain concepts easier or more intuitively. For example, like, sometimes this is a kind of an older design, but if you have a if you're adjusting something, you might have like one of those knobs that you turn. I've seen in older interfaces, they have those same knobs used to represent something being able to go up or go down in quantity or something. Just familiar actions can be implemented in the digital space as well. So these are the 10 heuristics of user interface design, super useful stuff. And if you're looking for more, they even have both of them, I think, are pretty well-known authors. Don Norman, especially, he's got some great books that he's written. Most notably, the design of everyday things. So if you're very interested in that kind of stuff or literature, then I would highly recommend that book by Don Norman for sure. And the last resource I'm going to share is useronboard.com. And this one, I've used this. Some of their stuff is a little outdated just because they've done breakdowns, or what they call teardowns, of popular services. And they'll break down the onboarding process of each of these companies. So for example, if we go to Instagram, they have a whole PowerPoint describing and criticizing or complimenting the onboarding process of all these services. So you can see that this one is taken from a while ago. It's a little older, but the principles are still true. So that's why I like to check in on this sometimes. So it's kind of friendly. It's a lot of kind of tongue-in-cheek jokes, but if you go through it, he's got a lot of opinions on just single screens like this. So this person notes that there's no tour or even description of what Instagram does. So it makes them not even sure if they want to go through the setup. And this is, a long time ago, before Instagram was as popular as it is now. But just being able to go through this PowerPoint and look at all of what other companies or other products do to onboard their users is very interesting. And they also have some articles about design patterns, what makes a good empty state, what makes what are some sensible defaults for your own systems, just some really great stuff. It's always interesting to learn a lot about UX and UI, because there's a lot of psychology behind it, and you get to learn about how people consume media and digital content. Is one of my favorite things about design, is understanding the reason why something is better than the other. But those are a few of my design resources that I use. Hopefully this was helpful, and I think we'll make a forum post with these links just to keep it available for everybody after this is over. But yeah, I hope this was helpful, and if people enjoyed it, then maybe we'll make this a more a reoccurring segment, and I can share more tips and tricks. But that's it for today.
Great, thank you, Person. That's really cool. It's kind of funny because I saw that bit on empty states. Empty state is when before you have any records. And for FileMaker developers, it's like one time when you first create a new table. After that, there's always either dummy data or real data in virtually every table that you have. But for the few people who have verticals, there's almost guaranteed to be an empty state when they first onboard. So we have to start to think about that, and especially web apps. You have to really start to think, because then the user could be brand new. So we have to design those where we never ever did before in typical FileMaker world. All right, awesome. We're going to jump to one of our main feature bits here, and we're starting to create a new page in Notion called Awesome BetterForms. And basically, it's just going to be a link to all kinds of really good stuff that's related to BetterForms, mostly spottings in the world and what people have built and things like that. And we also want to make an occasional segment on our Friday Live as well. So we're going to welcome back Neil Manchester. And Neil has a vertical, and maybe he can tell us a little bit about the process. And I asked him to come on the show again. He's been on a number of times as a guest in some presentations. But I asked him to come on because he's in the process of rebuilding his solution in BetterForms. So Neil, welcome back.
Thank you very much. Morning, good afternoon for everyone.
And maybe you could start off. Yeah, maybe you could start off with telling us what your solution does, sort of give us an overview.
Yeah, so if I do a share, I've just thrown a few notes on.
Awesome.
On a keynote. Okay, so as Charles says, I've got a vertical market solution called clinician. So it's a patient management system for aesthetic clinics. So I'm married to an aesthetic nurse, so Botox, fillers, chemical peels, all that sort of stuff. And it just started out as a bit of a pet project for her, probably about 10 years ago now, so that she could get rid of all of her paper consent forms and do it all electronically, basically. So it just started off as a single user FileMaker solution. And then because she was training other people, she ran a training company, other people started to see it, and it kind of grew into a business and has morphed into this vertical market solution over probably about the last 10 years. So I've probably currently got about 250 clinics, some with a single user, some with sort of up to 8 or 9 users. And it's just a traditional FileMaker solution. So each clinic has a copy of the same file. It's licensed through Claris via the solution bundle agreement. It's all hosted on Amazon EC2. And then I run an update. So whenever there's any new features or bug fixes or anything, I use Auto Migrator from Proof Guys to basically update each of those 250 copies of that same iClinician hosted file using the Auto Migrator. There's 3 versions. There's a light version, which is kind of like a free trial. There's the solo version, which is single user just on the iPad with sort of a lot of features, but not all the features. And then the premium version supports multiple users and has the sort of the full spectrum of features. My sort of users access it either through WebDirect on computer and phone, or via an iOS SDK app that I've built, which is available obviously in the App Store. That's kind of two-parted. There's a launcher file, which is the bit that comes as part of the iOS SDK app, and then the main iClinician.fmp12 file, which on the light version they download, and it sort of lives alongside the launcher in the inside the app. And then on the solo and premium, that's the part that's then hosted on FileMaker server on AWS. I first sort of found out about BetterForms. I was trying to add a couple of features, online booking, which was a big one that people have been asking about, so that clients could book their appointments online, and a patient portal so that patients could complete certain questionnaires, medical forms online before their appointments. I battled with how to achieve it. I'd tried various methods, WebDirect being one of them, and then Charles demoed BetterForms, and by the end of the first sort of demonstration, we'd almost built the online booking app. So I've been using it probably for about 2 years. It was early on in the start of the pandemic, And then I spent quite a bit of time during the pandemic building those two sort of add-ons to iClinician. Current issues that I've got, when a new clinic upgrades from the light version, so if they've been trialing it with the offline file, built into that iOS SDK app, I've got an FTP process that uploads the main FileMaker file to the current FileMaker server. When it works, it's great. It probably fails one time out of every 4 or 5. So I then end up with a client that's signed up for either solo or premium on a direct debit, but who has the data file stuck inside the app on their iPad. So we've then got to go through the process of either trying the process again, or if it still fails, then trying to get them to export that file from the app or connect via iTunes or all the various other methods. So it's quite a laborious process, and obviously doesn't give the best impression if it fails to my new customer. Whenever there's an upgrade, there's sort of then manual setup that I have to do as well. So even if that FTP process works, I've still got to add the new user into Auto Migrator so that they then get the new updates. If it's a premium user, I then have to update all of my BetterForm helper files so that they can use the online booking and the patient portal. If people want to switch between solo and premium, that's a manual process so that I have to kind of change file names, give them codes to update and the like. Whenever anyone forgets what their username or password is, I have to reset that for them. I've never managed to get down the route of third-party sort of authentication, so I'm still using the sort of the standard FileMaker authentication process. So if someone forgets, then I have to kind of help them out with that. And then the obvious one of, depending on a user's sort of connection and Wi-Fi dropping in and out, they lose connection to the server, and then sort of obviously that's not great for them. Even with Otto, I've found that the stage I'm at now with the probably 250 clinics, it's a lengthy process to push out an update, and I kind of need to psych myself up and allow probably 3 or 4 days of doing that late into the night so that people aren't there's no downtime to get everyone updated onto a new version. The other issue I've got is there's a couple of clinics where either someone works for two clinics, or there's one instance where there's an owner who has 3 or 4 clinics, and there's no easy way without moving away from my iOS SDK app for them to have multiple setups. It then means they have to start using FileMaker Go and sort of explaining how to use that and why we're moving away from what they feel is iClinician and then introducing FileMaker. So what prompted the move apart from all of that? Back in October, Jesse Roberts demoed his vertical market solution, which he built in BetterForms. I think it was actually the same Friday session where I just showed the online booking app that I'd built, but it kind of got me thinking that you all of a sudden have a single front-end user interface UX and a single FileMaker file to maintain, and then all the data is stored in that single file. So rather than having a FileMaker file for each clinic, every clinic's data is in the same file, and then you just display the data that is relevant to them in the front end. So it kind of got the old grey matter going, and I started to think, is this sort of a move that I kind of needed to make? And quite quickly, having had a good chat with Jesse on how he'd achieved it, decided that I was going to try and make the move and just use FileMaker as my back end, and then move the front end user interface into BetterForms, meaning that I could have access. You're no longer restricted to just Apple iPad. People can use it on Android as well. So that's what I decided to do. So first approach, I created a blank FileMaker file, and I imported the 87 tables that make up iClinician with all the data fields and all the calculation fields. And then I kind of started to rebuild my relationship graph using the same naming convention because I thought, you know, I know that almost off the top of my head. I can follow the same process. And I was kind of rebuilding the relationship graph alongside building the functionality that I'd got in iClinician, but building it in BetterForms. So, for example, as I started to build my patient list, I'd then go through and sort of rebuild the elements of the relationship graph relating to patients at the same time, so that it was sort of following through side by side. My aim was to try and sort of tidy up what had become over the kind of 8 to 10 years a fairly chunky file. Probably most people that have used FileMaker have experienced the same thing, where you add a table of currents in and then years later can't really remember why you've added it in, or extra fields and stuff. So I thought I can try and simplify it down by just rebuilding the elements I need as I got to that point of the development in BetterForms, because that's what my current iClinician relationship table looks like. So it's kind of fairly neat and tidy, but there's a lot of it. See, obviously that's zoomed out to 18% to be able to see the whole thing. And there's loads of table occurrences on there that I've got no idea what they do. So I was thinking, right, let's try and narrow that down, or sort of reduce that down, so that when I've got BetterForms at the front end and FileMaker at the back end, it's got rid of a lot of the stuff that I don't need. I followed the same sort of process with the scripting. So again, in my current FileMaker iClinician, there's loads of scripts that probably aren't required anymore. So I thought, well, I'll build those again as I go along. All the scripting that I'd really ever done up until very recently, or a lot of it, had predominantly been context based. So, you know, whenever I wanted to create a new record, it'd be go to the layout, create the record, or if I was doing a search for data, it'd be go to the relevant record, enter find mode, find the data. The same for sort of deleting and updating. Once I'd started to use BetterForms and Charles had sort of shown me some of the custom functions that they'd created, I was at this point, although I was using sort of context-based stuff for creating, updating and deleting, I'd started to use the BetterForm custom functions. You know, you get column as array to actually get the data to then pass back into BetterForm. So that was really the sort of the first time I'd really put any thought into the sort of the contextless approach. The other thing I did at the same time was I built a number of proofs of concept in BetterForms to make sure that I could kind of mirror the features that I knew I needed in iClinician, because obviously what I can't do is build a product that only offers half of the things that iClinician does, because I've got 250 clinics that will use some or all of those features, and I therefore need to make sure that anything I then move over to, they've still got the same features. In building the scripts, I'd kind of found myself with very long on utility scripts with loads of different if statements, which did everything that a BetterForm page needed. So if it was, say, for example, my appointment page for my calendar, that on utility script seemed to include pretty much all the different processes and was quite quickly becoming quite unwieldy. I know at the very start, Charles was talking to Dallas about sort of good coding practices. And I really quickly found that even though this was meant to be a new file that was cleaner and tidier, I was ending up with massively long scripts that were difficult to find the bits I needed and sort of keep control of. So fast forward from October, when I sort of first decided to do it, to last month's Friday Live, and we had Jason demoing the sort of the contextless approach to CRUD. So using a couple of scripts and some table occurrences meant that you could update records, create records, read and delete without having to go to a particular layout. And I just sort of, again, had another epiphany moment where I realized, despite my best attempts to do everything cleanly, I'd kind of gone down a bit of a rabbit hole and was doing everything wrong again. So Charles very kindly shared a copy of the starter file that that the BetterForms team use when they do a new project. That included those two really important scripts. So the ability to be able to delete a record or create, read, update it without having to build all that go to layout, find record, etc. It also recommended watching some YouTube videos on clean code by Uncle Bob. I've only watched the first one so far, but it was really good. So I highly recommend those if anyone's sort of thinking of doing the same thing. But I basically then decided to start again for a second time. So I took a copy. I took the copy of the template that Charles had given me and created my sort of iClinician BetterForms file. And then I decided I was just going to rebuild every single table that I needed from my current iClinician from scratch. So rather than copying it into the file, I just created a new table, and then I created the fields that I needed following the lower camel case format for naming convention, so that then mirrors the same setup that is being used in BetterForms. Jason had said that was really important because that was obviously how the universal deleter and creator scripts updated data. So the names needed to match the names in sort of both BetterForms and FileMaker. So I decided to build it all from scratch. And whilst doing that, I put a lot of thought into how could I get rid of tables from iClinician. And rather than having a table that might hold, for example, some products used on a treatment, or some line items on an invoice, for example, could I get rid of those tables and replace it by a field that just stored the JSON array or JSON object? I did the same thing to see if I could get rid of a field as well. So, excuse me. For example, I have a medical questionnaire that's probably about 100 questions long. A lot of those fields just hold a yes/no answer. So you end up with quite a wide table that doesn't really hold a lot of data. So I thought, right, well, if I could just get rid of all of those fields and have a single JSON field that just holds the array of answers. So I probably spent last month, didn't really do anything on the BetterForms side of things, but built the whole process for getting all of the data from iClinician into my new template file that I'd created. And what that meant was I've managed to go from 87 tables down to 37, which it just made me realize how much sort of crap, for want of a better word, is in the current file, and how bloated it had become. The biggest savings probably been on treatments. So my treatments were stored in 35 tables of various different for various different things. I've managed to get that down to 3. And I've gone from thousands and thousands of fields in those tables. The main treatment table itself was 314 fields, down to 159 fields across those 3 tables. So it's made the FileMaker side of things massively simpler and easier to manage. And I've now got a beautiful relationship chart. So the right hand side of that is the creator and deleter section. So that's what sort of drives that contextless process for adding and deleting and updating records. And then that left hand side basically has replaced that previous shot you saw with all those tables. So much easier to read, so much simpler to sort of to manage, and hopefully I'm now not going to end up with adding loads and loads of table occurrences in the future that I don't need. So benefits, obviously the way because I've done that now, I've got my entire iClinician schema ready to go. So I think the initial approach of trying to redo the schema whilst doing my BetterForm development probably was the wrong approach. Now that I've got the whole schema done in FileMaker, it's going to make the development side in BetterForms easier, because I'm not then having to jump backwards and forwards between the two as much. the naming convention change has made life so much simpler because they're both the same. So you're not constantly having to try and remember what you've called something in one and what it is in the other. That CRUD process of being able to add, update, read, delete records is again vastly simpler. I've only really started using that to actually do the deleting and the creating and stuff over the last sort of week or so, but it's so much easier to sort of manage. And obviously, because I've now worked out that I don't need to constantly be building and parsing JSON arrays, I can just save it in FileMaker, because that's what then needs to be passed back to BetterForms. So it's been sort of twofold. It's reduced the complexity of the FileMaker structure, and it's taken out all the need to take a JSON array that has come in from BetterForms, pass it out into fields, and then when I need it back in BetterForms, build the array and send it back again. It just makes life far simpler. So if I quickly just jump over to, so I'd give you a quick overview of kind of where I'm at in terms of the development. I've got a long way to go, because unfortunately I can't spend all day doing it because I've got to deal with the customers that I've currently got. But
I should know
we'll see where we're up to.
That Neil is sometimes up at crazy hours. He's in the UK, and I know it's like 4 a.m. and he's on his couch banging away on answering support. It's like, if he's up, I'm going to be up, right? So it's pretty awesome how dedicated you are.
Yeah, it's kind of you've got no, you know that no one's going to be ringing you at 4 a.m, so it's the best time to get stuff done. So
yeah,
hopefully Pearson's not going to look at this and go, he's not following any of the UX rules. So I've done quite a bit of development just on the sort of the design and layout process, and the ability to sort of customize the nav bar. I can't show you this bit yet because it stopped working. I've not been able to work out why, but I've almost got it that clients will be able to change the theme. So I can have in their preferences, there can be a number of different color options. They can choose the color they want, and then when they hit the save button, the whole thing changes. So all of because it uses Tailwind, all of the nav bar colors will change, all the buttons will change. So that's really good, because it's a feature that I've had a lot of requests for over the years, which are just too difficult to try and achieve in FileMaker. So it's always just kind of stayed the standard blue color. I've not, unfortunately, this isn't all the stuff that I've done, but I'll just show you a couple of the elements that I have done. A lot of these are just sort of name holders. But if I go to the client's layout first, I decided on the sort of the list view to just load the last 20 clients that have been modified. So it'll just throw in the last 20 that clinic has, for that clinic that they've been looking at. They can load more if they want to, but it's also got a search feature, which I'll show you in a minute. When they then click on the client, it'll first of all open up like as a data view of that record. So main data at the top, and then it'll show records from other parts of the system that are linked to that person. So that again, only showing the 5 most recent. So notes, appointments, treatments. There'll then be a lot more on there, documents, prescriptions and stuff as I build it out. And then to edit the record, then when they click, it then opens that record up in a card window, so that's where the data can then be modified, and then either saved if they've made changes, or just cancelled or deleted. There's some checks in there then that if, for example, we've changed some data and they click cancel, it checks to see that the onload state is now different to the current state, and just checks that you do want to cancel rather than save. And then it does obviously do the same sorts of checks if you ask to sort of delete the record. The search function, I wanted to keep the search really sort of simple. So say we just put my name in there, that will then go and do a search and find records from all the different parts of the system, and then show it as a list view. So there's two 2 clients where Neil is either in the name or the email. There's 74 treatments. So again, you can find the treatment that you need, and then the same working the way across. And then eventually, once the whole system's built, obviously they'll be able to then just click on that treatment and it'll take them to that record. So if I was to click on the patient there, obviously that's now jumped me through to that well, client as it is here, sorry, rather than to the one before. So that makes sort of searching really simple, be it on a laptop, computer, or even down to a phone. The other key bit I've been working on is like the calendar. So I need to replicate the calendar functionality. It uses fullcalendar.io as the sort of the basis. And then there's some sort of functions in there for hiding people, changing the default start time, end of the day and stuff. You can search for a client from the calendar. And then once you've found them, you can click on their name and then click on the calendar and create the appointment that way. And because I've already selected the patient, it automatically links the patient up in the client field there. You can add in multiple procedures. You can change the duration and stuff from here. You can update the prices and it'll update your sort of your totals and stuff. All of this functionality I've kind of already got in FileMaker in my current system. So it's kind of been what I've been trying to achieve is copy what's already there to sort of mirror what people expect. So what you see here is quite similar to what's already in iClinician. So yeah, I've got lots of stuff left to go, but it's I think probably the biggest thing to take away, and if anyone else was thinking of sort of doing a vertical market, particularly if they've already got one, is start from scratch with a fresh FileMaker file, rather than trying to kind of ad hoc it and use what you've already got, because it's just made life so much easier. Just within the last couple of weeks, having moved back over to doing then the front end, it's much easier to sort of to manage that. And just coming back to the so this is what my FileMaker file now looks like. So this follows the sort of the setup from Charles's sample file, and then I've then also made a big effort to try and break down the on utility scripts, so that rather than having it all in that single script, each process then just calls its own subscript, which clearly was the way it was designed, because that's why there's a supported scripts folder. But again, that's just made my life a lot easier to kind of see what's doing what and where it's all going.
Wow. That's really awesome, Neil. That's pretty good. I haven't, I guess every now and then when I see it, it's a big chunk further.
Small steps. But yeah, as I say, having redesigned that's been the big thing over the last month, redesigning the FileMaker side of it. So thanks for obviously sharing that file, because it's made life a lot easier.
And we will make that file available. I know some people were asking about it. It's not super special. It's pretty empty. What makes it, we use it quite often as a starting template. It doesn't have a bunch of bloat in it like some starting templates. It just has a few things that we typically are going to need. Since we build mostly apps that don't have any FileMaker UI, we just need a dashboard that accesses the raw tables, and BetterForms is kind of pre-installed in the file as well, usually.
Charles, can I jump in and ask a Q?
Yeah.
To Neil?
Yeah.
So in your current, or I guess what's going to be your previous solution, you had a FileMaker file for each separate clinic?
Yeah, correct. So at the minute, I've got kind of almost 250 copies of the same file running on multiple Amazon FileMaker instances, or Amazon instances running FileMaker server, and then each clinic has their own copy of that file with their own data in. So the move now is there'll be a single FileMaker file, and just like you would, in in a portal, you just show the appointments that are relevant to that particular patient. It just kind of takes it to the next level. So whenever I call data from FileMaker in BetterForms, I only call the data for that clinic. The other thing that means is, which I've not built this bit yet, but I know it's possible, and it's something that again Charles and Jesse showed me. Let me just, where's it gone? Oh, is the, sorry, I've got all this clogging up the top. Is the, in the top corner here, that means that you can give people access to different organizations. So for a lot of users, they'll only have one clinic there, it'll be their clinic. But say, for example, the instance where I've got the guy that owns two different clinics. Yeah, he'll be able to just click on the second clinic, and that'll just then change the ID and then reload the data for that page. And then wherever he goes, it's just going to pull the second clinics. And then again, for me as the developer, I'll be able to access every single clinic from there, so that if someone's got a problem, I can just be logged in, click on that clinic, and I can see exactly what they're looking at. So
it's not necessarily based on the clinic per se, it's based on the person, because they could be related to multiple clinics. Yeah, and that's something that uses, or will use once I know how to use it, Charles's ham technique, where you can give different users different types of privilege in terms of what data you want them to be able to pull.
Rick, you had a question?
Yes. So I'm also building a vertical solution, and actually I'm actually surprised as to how far along I've come in just a month. And I was just looking at your menu selector right there, and that's what I did last week, right? I implemented that menu, and it's freaking awesome. I mean, I was just like, wow, like just Jesus. And yeah, I can only see the related data for that person, right? Just nothing else, and nothing comes through the browser. Just like Charles was saying, all the data in the browser is hackable. So I was just floored as to, and I started from scratch, but there was a feature that you described that I thought was that I wanted to ask about, which is how are you managing your clients? Are you building a separate portal for your own backend to manage your clients, or are you keeping that in FileMaker?
Like
for me, I did it in FileMaker just because it was so quick and it's internal, and literally it's just me right now, right? So, but eventually when I grow, who knows where people are going to be working, and I would like to create a portal for that. But for now, I kept it in FileMaker, and I wanted to ask you, have you thought about that, and how are you approaching that?
Yeah, mine's currently in FileMaker. I suppose it's probably like most people with a profession that the database that I store my clients' details in is like horribly old and never gets anything done on it. It's probably like a builder that their house has probably got loads of work that needs doing. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I guess in the long run, yeah, particularly if you were starting to take members of staff on and looking to grow the business and ever potentially sell it, then having a BetterForms front end for your admin would make sense, wouldn't it? But yeah, I haven't got to that point yet. Like you, it's just me at the moment, so I can manage with my. It actually just uses an old copy of FileMaker starting point that I've adapted over the years. But yeah, that I'll do that next.
Yeah, I mean,
we do that ourselves as well. We have
me,
a BetterForms in panel, but it's very, very minimal. It's not pretty. It hasn't been updated in 5 years. It's the same one, but it serves its purpose, and it doesn't need to. Generally, they don't need to be. Neil made a really good point. If you want to be able to sell your operation, and that's what your team is going to be using. But for us, we're not in it very often. Maybe once every 2 days or something like that to look something up.
Yeah, for me, it's just I'm just thinking of support, right? Like everything you do, you have to support it, right? And so I used to have a client that used to tell me, Rick, you have to make it simple, stupid. like simple stupid. That was like, and so that meant that I had to break things down to, and I think we've talked about this, Charles, is like the simplest possible way that the customer can do it, and make simplicity involves an incredible amount of complexity, I think, and so when I see your stuff, I'm just floored. It's like, wow, this is so cool. So it's simple and elegant, and just I can imagine the amount of work you put into it.
Beverly, who had left the conversation, just added something. She said she started web at the same time as FileMaker, so my process has always been more web-like than FileMaker design. And this is kind of touches base on something that Pearson mentioned earlier. And quite often when I'm giving demos, people say, well, it doesn't feel like FileMaker. And what makes FileMaker feel like FileMaker is we're limited to the constraints of the tools that we have. So we sort of build around that. We make portals, but portals can't automatically grow in size. We make conditional elements that can hide and show, but the rest of the layout doesn't automatically collapse underneath it. And all of those very, very subtle, almost micro gestures make an app feel like a web app, or like the rest of the apps that we mostly use, versus a native FileMaker app. And I'm not saying FileMaker apps are wrong or anything like that, but you can often make an interface very, very simple, as Rick just mentioned, and accomplish exactly the same things. I'm amazed sometimes when I go and see this big complexity, and then the designer like Pearson comes back and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, that works. That does all the same stuff, and there's like way less buttons and way less confusion, and very subtle things are hidden in the user interface, maybe a subtle different color or a highlight color or something like that, that helps group that information, where I have big boxes around it and all kinds of stuff. So that's really great, Neil. Thank you for sharing that update.
No problems.
Does anybody have any other questions for Neil?
That was very helpful. Thanks, Neil.
No worries, thanks.
All right, awesome. Well, we'll continue. I want to talk about, somebody mentioned it already, I think Neil did, FM HAM. And HAM is a module that we have for handling really complex privileges and authorizations. So just for some nomenclature, an authentication is who you are, and an authorization or a privilege is what you are allowed to do under that role. So you can think of it as a privilege, a role. A role is technically usually a group of privileges. A privilege is the finite element of what you can do. I can see this, I can't see that. And when you're building apps, a lot of you probably already built some type of mechanism in FileMaker before that manages security, manages roles and things like that. And there's probably a lot of moving parts and apparatus around that. And as a principle, my style of coding is to have things super simple but highly flexible. That goes from everything from our product for the most part. Yes, there's a slightly higher learning curve, but where you can go with it is much further. And I think everything should more or less follow that. Everything we engineer should follow that paradigm. So we came up with this mechanism, a mechanism for managing that. In BetterForms, our app, we needed to do a number of things. We needed to be able to manage things like how many apps can you create in the system? Can you see this? Can you do that? Can you create more servers than you're allowed to, and things like that? So those are sort of related to the user, but in our case, they're kind of related to subscriptions, but really a subscription is the same thing as a role. Neil said he had like a low level, an intermediate level, and a high level tier. Those are technically 3 different roles, and they're allowed to do different things. So they're really the same. So that's why we came up with HAM. So just to understand to further understand the problem that it solves, let's just jump over to here and look at a few different stories. So one story is you have different users and they're allowed to do different things. That's like different tiers, for example, or somebody who's an administrator and somebody who is a general new user, brand new, somebody that you may be just onboarding and they can maybe not even write to data, and you want to be able to change that easily. Sometimes you need to give a single user or a single group extra permissions. For example, if you have everybody working in a company, but the IT person probably can log into every computer. right? So that would be an example of a privilege set that they have. But the IT person probably can't change the accounting payroll amount that the salary that somebody makes. So they, in one way, they have this great, really wide privilege set, and in another way, they have a very narrow scope of what they can do with that. Often you have third-party applications that need to interface to your solution. So they need to be able to follow that same permission. So that means you have to have a single source of truth for the concept of the permission. So if I have a privilege, I shouldn't be able to go and change the accounting, my salary, if I go and use the new system versus the old system, right? So the new system has to follow or mirror the old system's privileges, but I don't need to recreate all of that complexity in the new system. I just need to have a Boolean somewhere that says, yes, I can do it, or no, I can't do it. And that's an example of BetterForms, where BetterForms is a front-end separate application technically than your FileMaker application, then of course they talk. So we need to mirror all of those privileges into the front end. And then another use case is you have some kind of a vertical and you have subscriptions or users or limits and things like that, various things. Maybe you want to sell add-ons. Like for example, maybe Neil wants to have his middle tier package has 3 users, but for an extra $10 a month, they can add a user for every $10. So now he needs that easy way of managing the ability to add one extra package of 3 users or something like that. So now he's got 6. And you have to be able to have that work seamlessly without a whole bunch of complicated code in your app. And as you know, we can code almost everything, right? Everybody here can, with enough if statements, you can make anything happen. You can write a chess game with a bunch of if statements, but it's incredibly complex. And that's where we want to simplify that. So let's look at some examples of some of the, or actually that's about me, you don't care. Okay, we'll move on. Here we go. All right, so this is where HAM comes in. HAM just stands for Headless Authorization Module, right? The fundamental premise is that it's simple. It doesn't have opinions, so that means you can use it for anything. It's not designed like these are the names of the roles and this is what roles can do or anything like that. Super flexible. That was another design requirement. Progressive, meaning progressive not as in like modern, but meaning that you can use it as little or as much as you want. So that means you can take an existing system, no matter how complex it is, by simply adding a single field and 3 custom functions, you can start using HAM in this and start migrating things across. So you can use it as little as much as you want. It doesn't add anything bloat to your system. It's not an add-on. It doesn't add a bunch of garbage that you have to yank out about 10 different layouts and all these different fields and things like some solutions as well. Because it's headless, headless means it does not have any user interface. And it's, I call it sustainable. It's future-proof, meaning that it's super flexible. So we're not going to paint ourselves into a corner in some fashion. All right. Technically speaking, it's not a module. It's more of a way of thinking about permission. So if you think about some of the things like Neil did, it's not so much, it's more of a design pattern, you can call it, than a way of an actual chunk of code. Right? A design pattern meaning he's talking about separating the separation of concerns and scripts. He talked about using the ability to have a unified place where you write, create, and update records and so on. So let's look at an example. So here's an example. You have 3 basic users, or sorry, you have 3 types of users. You have a basic user, a manager, and an administrator. And if you have any questions along the way, please, by all means, just jump right in. Okay, so we got these 3 users. All of the users have roles or permissions. And let's have a look at what those users look like. So you have a basic user. They cannot add new users. They cannot edit users. They can change their own information. So I could change like my contact information or something. And I can have 1 widget in the app. I'm allowed to have 1 widget of whatever that is. And then we have a manager. A manager can do anything a basic user can do. So this is where the complexity starts. If you're coding this in by hand, these are really easy to do. I would normally have a field called role in my user table. And I would just say one piece of my code normally, I would say something like, if role equals basic user, then wrap a bunch of stuff in an if statement and I'm good. Right? But then this is where the complexity comes in, is they can do anything a basic user can do, plus they can edit users, Now they have a cannot edit users. So this one here, this privilege technically overrides this privilege, right? So that's where the complexity starts to come in, right? They can have 3 widgets, right? That I could probably code easy enough. I could just say, you know, if role equals manager, widget count equals 3, right? Something like that. An administrator, well, an administrator can inherit everything that a manager can do. So now I get this extra layer of code. So now there's more complexity. And then maybe somebody from operations or something, they say, well, we need a brand new role. We call it a swing shift manager or something like that. And they have to have a new set of functions, but it's a mixed match of all these other things, but not on Tuesday. They're not allowed to do that because Tuesdays, it's not supposed to be, that's supposed to be disabled. All kinds of really crazy, crazy situations. And it's like, well, how the heck am I going to code all of those things and make it future-proof so that I don't go into a million scripts, right? I have, you know, maybe 1,000 scripts in my system, and I don't have to go and make changes all over that script for that one edge case and a zillion if statements. So you can start to see where the problem lies here. Then we have exceptions, right? An exception is some type of an override. Maybe the manager is leaving for the week on vacation, and we want to disable a certain privilege or a certain set in the app. But this is kind of an odd scenario because they just came up to me last week and they said, hey, the boss is going to be going. Can you disable the ability to auto push a report? We want to delay that report. And it's like, okay, now I have to code that in, right? Or I have to just maybe comment out the code or something like that. I have to do some kind of stuff that's not really scalable or long lasting. So does that make sense so far what the fundamental problem with doing privileges is? Can you sort of relate to that? Have you ever had to do any of that type of stuff in FileMaker? Again, can all be solved with a whole whack of if statements, right? Conditionals. But if we think about this as data, and this is why HAM is really, it's a way of thinking about things, okay? So it's a way of just sort of thinking differently here. So if we think about this privilege set here as data, right? And we were to represent this, let's look at this as JSON. So we have a basic user, that would be a key. And if I can actually, I sent Agnes once in my, I use JSON editor online, and I sent her once a link to her. And every time now, whenever I have, it's got her name in here. So it's kind of funny. It's some kind of a thing. So we take this code, here's the JSON representation of it. And if I was to collapse this, we have 3 different roles, and we could add more roles because it's extensible, right? And we look at a basic user, and we have some Booleans and maybe some numbers, or it could even be text. It could be anything, really, right? It doesn't have to. The whole concept here is we're not thinking with restrictions. We're thinking without restrictions, which means it's data. So we have a role called add users, edit own details, and widgets allowed, right? But then we have this next role up, and if you remember from over here, the next role, oops, I just probably deleted that. Just a second. There we go. The next role, it says can do anything a basic user can do. All right, so how do we represent that? So now what I've done is we've taken our 2 extra new features, which in theory should override the features here if they have the same names, right? Now they don't have to, again, you can have totally separate lists of features, but if you want to be able to say, have a certain privilege and then automatically enable that for every group and not add it to every group, you can just have the group inherit the prior group. This doesn't work for every, the concept of inheritance doesn't work for every scenario, but it doesn't matter because again, it's data, so it's 100% flexible. So here we have this thing inherit, and if you notice there's square braces here, which means it's an array, can take more than one, and a manager can now inherit basic user. So that means you can extend this, this is where the extensibility comes in, and I can come up with some new thing called sales department. Sales department, there we go. Dallas was asking about how I can read code, but the trade-off is I cannot spell. All right, so we have a sales department and something like can make commission. And that would be something like true. So now the sales department is kind of an edge case, right? Is it a basic user or is manager? It doesn't really matter because maybe managers are allowed to make commissions. So I can just say inherit the sales department. There we go. And now my manager gets all the privileges of the sales department. So that's what I mean by extensible, right? We're thinking about data, not thinking about implementation and our limitations of what we can do in code. We're just thinking about the permutations, I guess you could say, the combinations of the data. All right, so now we can represent those three privilege sets. We represent them in JSON. Does that make sense how they're being inherited here? The manager can inherit the basic user, the admin can inherit the manager, and so on. Right? All right, I see a couple heads nodding. So again, it's just data, that's it. That's all we're doing so far. So how do we do something with this? Well, when you're checking for privileges, somewhere in your system, there's going to be a conditional that says, can the user do the privilege? If yes, proceed. If no, kick them out or alert or do something, right? Cause some kind of alternate workflow. So that's where we take this, that's where we take this series of permissions. And at the end of the day, if I am an admin and I want to know if I'm allowed to add users, I would have to look it up. Edit users is true. So, and add users is false, but we're going to assume that edit users and add users are almost the same here. So edit users is true. So therefore, an admin can do the privilege. So at the end of the day, it comes down to a flat set of a bunch of privileges or rights, and can you do it or can't you do it? That's what this all distills down to. So that's where we come over to here. We take that object and we flatten it out, and we flatten it to here. Now that's a pretty simple object, and that's what we actually do our testing against. So now if you imagine this as JSON, in my script that does something like create new user, I just have to say if JSON get whatever this thing is, add new user is true, then continue, and if it can't, it's false. I exit, right? So we've taken this complex hierarchical way of looking at data, and we've dropped it down to a very, very thin, flat object, and flat is the key here. So that's testable, and you don't have to remember all the paths and all that kind of garbage like that. So as a flat object, we can test against it. So let's look at how we test. So here's an example now of where ham comes in. Somewhere in your script, you're just going to have something that says, if ham check privilege, can see accounting, and that's it. Right now, what this is going to do is this is going to take the existing user. We'll look at how it also gets set up earlier. Remember, there's only 3 custom functions here. It's really simple, right? So data is the concept. We're going to say, what is the level of this user? This is an admin person. Using the set of logic, the truth table that we've made, which is, I seem to be having some there. Just a sec here. That's weird. Sorry, my cursor must be somewhere. There we go. Using the truth table, and this is our truth table for our users. You can think of it like that. We're going to derive what the actual answer is. Now, it's really complicated to figure it all out in terms of JSON math, if you will, but we can. This is a very readable one. This one here, not so readable. I think I must have undone something here, so I'm just going to undo some stuff in my UI here. There we go. I must have deleted that by mistake. There we go. So what that's going to do is that's going to distill everything down, and then now we have this nice, simple, easy way of testing something. Ham check privilege, can see accounting. That's it. And that's going to return a Boolean, true or false. And maybe it's the widget count, and it might say ham check privilege maximum widgets, and in which case it would return a number. And then you can say is greater than whatever the current number of widgets that they have is, right? So that's kind of the idea of ham. So let's see how it actually works in real life now. So again, we're taking, just to recap, we're taking basic set of hierarchical privileges, and they can be as deep as you want because of these inheritance, any combination of that you want, any number of them that you want. And in BetterForms, we actually use this. This is like a test drive, citizen developer, pro developer, enterprise, and so on. And they have set different privileges. Okay. And then we're distill that down into a flat object. And then that flat object is what we do the testing against. So here's how we implement it. Let me just jump over to here. So we do a few things. What we need that basic set of privileges. So we have to store that somewhere. That's going to be typically stored in a preferences table. Then we have to identify who the user is and figure out what their groups that they're assigned to that user is. And they could have more than one group. It could be a sales department and an accounting department, right? Again, it's flexible. So it's whatever way you can wrap your head around it. And then we need to test against those. And now if we're using BetterForms to test against it, we say something as simple as visible_calc. And then we would usually put the ham object, the flattened object, underneath a key called ham. And we typically store it in the app model. So we just say app.ham.kenzie field. Now, doesn't matter who the user is, it automatically just works. All right. And if we're in FileMaker, here's the example of FileMaker, how we would use that as well. Right. And I'm going to pull up a demo here. I use this one a lot because it's got lots of techniques in here. And FileMaker. Okay, I should, we'll talk about this in just a second here, but let's have a look at how it works. And if you have any questions, guys, please jump right in right away. All right, this is just a backend for a file here. And I want to show you, this is the preference table, just nice and quick and dirty and ugly. And if we look at the actual preferences, this is a super admin, they have an admin, and they have a user. Right? The order doesn't really matter here. A typical user can see all users, so that you can see who the other users of that organization are, is true. Can do data entry is true. And then the admin person can manage users, yes. That means they can invite new users in this particular case. Can generate a survey, that's a use case specific to this app, and can see all users. So where this shows up in the app, and then they can inherit the regular ones. Where this shows up in the app, I'll show you in just a second. And then finally, there's a super admin. The super admin would be the owner of the software. In this case, if this was Neil's app, Neil is a super admin, right? And it's not somebody who's within this organization, okay? So this is basically the truth table. So when the client comes along and they say, we need an extra privilege, we say, okay, we can add that extra privilege. And it's really easy to add the extra privilege. I don't need a UI for this. I can say new priv. And if it's a string or it can be a number, or I'm just going to put a Boolean and it's true. So now I can add this new privilege true. And now this will echo that one small entry, which only takes a second to do, will echo all the way through my entire app now. All right, so you can start to see, hopefully you can start to see the elegance here. Okay, so let's look at it. So I have this thing, I'm logged in as Jason over here. And if I go to the user table here, and we find Jason, not Jason. Okay, so here's Jason's user table, user record in FileMaker. And of course, remember this app is FileMaker. It's FileMaker first. It's not a BetterForms technique, this ham stuff is just a FileMaker thing. But it's designed to be used equally in other systems. So that's why we can use it over here. I'm gonna use BetterForms to demonstrate. So here's Jason. And let's see. So he's got a group called ham groups. So these are his administrative groups. And right now Jason's a member of the super admin group, but we could easily just simply go and make him sales department, something like that. And now Jason's a member of those two groups. I don't have a sales department group, but if I did, that's how that would work. Okay. So as a super admin, he's allowed to do almost everything. So you can see over here within the app, Jason can actually change organizations like a super user, and he can jump to all these other orgs here within the system. So he's allowed to do that. No other user would be, because this is technically like a data breach, right? We wouldn't want a user, these are competing companies. We wouldn't want a user to be able to see the two different companies. right? So we've given Jason or the system administrator that privilege. But let's change the role now. Let's jump over to here and we'll change them. I think the other one was user. We're going to go to user and I'm going to change his role. Okay, so now Jason's just a user. I just want to point out, you can see generate survey notifications. If I go to the account page here, I can see the users and so on in this page here. Okay, I'm just going to refresh this. Actually, I'm also going to go to the home page here. So now when I click here, you can see that there's no other organizations. Right now, we've made the change in the back end. Of course, it's echoed in the front end. We haven't had to do anything. That whole complexity of the deeper object is taken care of for us by ham. If let's see, and let me change him to an admin.
Charles?
Yes.
Just a question. Where you store the variable, the ham variable, inside the app variables, right?
It's
where
in
do
the
you store it?
preferences.
Is it? It's in the preference, but
Right.
it's hidden to the. If you want to hack the variable, it's quite hidden or not?
So, so I see what you're getting at. Yeah, let me talk about that from a security aspect. Okay. Remember, everything in the front end is hackable. I go like this, and I can change anything. That doesn't mean it changes in the database. It's just purely the UI. I can do that to my bank account. Like my son goes there, changes his bank account, tells his buddies he's got $10,000 in the bank, right? But of course, it's not real. So there's two sides of this in this case when we're using with BetterForms. The first side is that we actually have the privilege set in the back end so that when we run scripting, we run something like, let's look at a script in here, something like invite users where they have, here's an account, invite new user. I think that should have one. All right, so here's a invite new user. That means to add a new user in the system. Here's the security here. So what's happened now is in a global before hook, we build up the ham flat object. We configure ham for this particular hook. We do it every hook, right? So I know that Jason just refreshed and I built up a ham object and I have that ham object in memory, if you will. Ham uses some global variables in FileMaker. So then what I'm doing here is I'm saying exit loop if. Now we would normally probably do this in a couple lines of code, but we use it all the time. So we've actually made a little bit bigger object here. So it looks a little bit bigger here. And it's basically, this is just for other stuff, future growth. It's basically saying if not ham check privileges can manage users, and this is a true and false, then we're throwing an action, a BetterForms action saying error, it's not allowed. So in case they hack the front end, we always check the back end, right? Because you cannot guarantee the data that's coming in. Just gonna let this person, oh, they're already in. You cannot guarantee the data that's coming in for quality, right? They could be hacking it. Now, if they already have the privilege and they invite somebody, there's no reason for them to hack it. And if they're not allowed to do that, we derive their set of privileges from the user ID. That can't be hacked, right? So all your sources of truth have to come from the user ID. You derive that to the organization, to the owner of the data, right? In this case, you know, maybe I'm not allowed to delete a record. Well, what happens if they go under the hood and they change an ID, right? Suddenly they've just deleted the competition's ID somehow, right? So you have to check for those kinds of things, you know, just like if I make a deposit in the bank and I enter a fake number and they use the camera deposit feature, I have to check for, you know, somehow in the system has to assure that so I don't just put $1 million in my account, right? And that's what we're doing here. So we're basically checking the privilege. And then after we check the privilege, this is the true command, we exit the loop. So this actually exits the loop and it also adds an action. Now, again, this is a little bit confusing, maybe because we're putting 3 lines of code, FileMaker script code into one line. But the thing is, we do this because we can just copy and paste one line, stick it all over the app anywhere we need to do it. So it makes it really easy. Here's another one, delete user. All right, let's see, make sure the user owns, I'm just looking for ham right here. So here's a delete user. And this is basically saying can manage users. That's the same privilege set. So if the can manage users is turned off, we can turn that off. The other thing we do with ham is when you first load your app or whenever you change users, we have to load that ham object to the front end to do the conditional stuff to show things as well. So let's look under the hood here, under the dev tools, and we'll look under here, and you can see here's ham right here. Let's do this so it's less confusing. Oops, one and this one. There, can do data entry, can see all users. That's the only privileges that this particular user has now. Right,
Yes.
so now again, all my front end can hang off of this really easy, super easy to check, right? You just have to say, you know, visible, say visible calc, ham, app.ham. Whatever the privilege is. So it's really, really simple.
And did you say that you load that in the on-app load?
Yeah, we do it twice.
As opposed to on-app login, or both?
What we often do is we have an on-app load, which is that's a hook that's run when the application first loads. But when somebody logs in, you need to set the environment as well. So the on-app load, what we usually do is calls a script called set app environment or set user environment. And the reason we break them down into two, you could sort of do the same thing twice, but there may be something that you want to do one time when an app first loads, but every time a user changes, that you also have to do different stuff. So we separate those two workflows out slightly into two different scripts. But basically what's happening is on app load, or over here, somewhere in here, let me just grab it. There's a global before, developer hooks right here. There's two different apps in this app. There's two separate applications here. That's why you see two hook sets. So here's global before. And in this global before, there's a section for ham. And here we get the ham groups. So we just do a get column out of the preferences. That just gets them out of the prefs. And then we get the user object. So now I got the user object and I got the ham object. The user object is what groups it belong to. The ham object is what the rules of the group are. And then we get any overrides. Now you can also put in overrides as well. And then finally, we develop, this is kind of for future growth here, because we know that the client down the road is going to be adding some other stuff in here. So when Lindsay added this in, she made it a little bit more flexible. And then finally, we build this ham user object. We add that user object or the flattened object into the app. We have app right here, right? And that's when we create the ham config as the second custom function. There's 3 custom functions to this module, that's it. So one of them is to configure, that basically does all the magic. The other one does the testing of it. And the third one is just utilities to help break the code down, so that the first one calls the third one. And that's honestly, that's for the most part it. So let me show you how you're going to, how you install it. How are we doing for time? Not too bad. Let me show you how you install it. And it's pretty simple. Let's jump to, right. So again, create a ham preferences field, put your truth table in there. Then second, somewhere when you either change users, in BetterForms, every hook is a new user, right? Like it can potentially be a different user. So in BetterForms, we use it on typically on the global before hook. We set up the ham object. Ham takes care of itself. You don't have to do any other variables. It'll instantiate global variables for that hook only. So it takes care of that. So you don't have to remember to clean up or anything. If you're using it in FileMaker, it's usually some kind of on first window open, on user login. Usually you have some kind of initialization script and you throw it in there. Then you go ahead and start using it, and that's it. Right, I'm going to show you an example of how we use this. And I'm going to pause recording for just a second here. So sorry for the people who are watching this at a later date, but what I'm going to show is I'm going to show our admin panel and how we use ham ourselves and how we can make it really, really easy to give a specific user extra privileges. Here. There. Can you see that? Is that live right now? Is that moving? Is that live?
Yeah.
My screen? Or is it frozen?
No, it's live.
It's live.
Okay, thank you. All right. All right. Okay, so let's jump back, and there's a few other features that Ham has. So remember, it's kind of hard for me to demonstrate it. So you have to understand the concept. It's really 3 custom functions. I could show you them, but you know that's not quite as exciting. But here they are: ham check priv, ham configure, and there's it's a fairly lengthy custom function that does the configuring. It builds the flat object. The next one is ham check privileges, that does all the privilege checking in here. And then finally, there's another utility one that has a bunch of additional functions within it, right? It's not so much about the code, it's about the concept of data, right? Now, Ham does a couple of the really, really cool things, right? You can have extensions on those keys. So I can say _eval, and it does a FileMaker evaluation for the truthiness, right? So I could do something like, like this. It'd be ham _check priv. This is going to be semi pseudocode, but it's going to be more or less correct. This will be ham check privilege, and then I want to have only on Sunday. Only there. And there's a blank parameter that's for extra options. All right, so let's say I have some custom function and I want to check this. And my goal is to have this privilege only enabled on Sunday, right? Or whatever the day it is, first day of the week. Now I can go over to my configure over here, and I can add a privilege called only on Sunday. I probably wouldn't call it this because it's too hard coded to Sunday. I'd say only on end of week or something like that in case they change the end of the week or the beginning of the week. But I do this, I go _eval, right? And this is very BetterForms like. And then I can say, what is it, FileMaker's day of week? Is that what it is? Something like that. 2 or 1, I don't know. Is that the function? Anybody know what it is? Day of week? That's how much I know my FileMaker functions. But it's something like that. I think that's what it is, day of week or weekday or something like that. And I'm not sure if 1 or 7 is Sunday, but what you get the idea. So now what will happen is this will evaluate when you go and check the privilege. And if it's Monday, the privilege will be true. And if it's not, the privilege will be false. So you could do really advanced stuff in here because this is just FileMaker's calculation engine. You could say, do a get column on the user's maximal budget. And if they're over their budget, they're not allowed to do a privilege. And it can be that complex. All the complexity sits in one local spot so you can see it. And then the checking is very, very elegant. It would be very, oops.
Hey, Charles, I think it would be day of week, get current date equals 1.
Yeah, you get the idea. Exactly. Right. The idea, yeah, the main concept is that you can do anything you want there. Right. I think we have a max as well. I think we added that. You'd have to check the code. But basically it's eval and sum are the main ones. So the sum just adds things up, which is a very common use case for setting maximum things that people are allowed to do. And then the eval is for those real edge cases where you need to reference it off to some other live piece of data. Since you can use things like, it's an evaluation, so you can use things like get column and whatnot. That gives you a ton of flexibility now. You don't have any limits. A couple other things I want to mention too is Ham does use a global variable. If you're using it in FileMaker, some people don't like using globals because they can be potentially inspected somehow. So that's okay. We've addressed that because it's encrypted. You can add an encryption key and then you can store the key, whatever mechanism you want, and it'll actually encrypt all of your flattened objects, so you can't even inspect and they can't hack it. Right, so it's a little safer that way. Does a few other things too. There's a lot of ability to determine when you evaluate. If you were to do that day of the week, get day of week or whatever it is, if you were to do that, and if user stays logged in and you built the flattened object, well, that could be on the second day of it could have evolved to the next day, right? And the user never logged out, so that data is actually stale because it's temporal. So there's a privilege in ham where you can set the when it evaluates, does it just generate the flat object or does it build it up each time? Because that is slightly more expensive. So we have some links here in the show. I pasted the links to the show, and we'll make this a public, I think it already is a public document. If you're interested in using it, there's a sample file. I don't even think I used the sample file, but it's pretty, let's see if I have it open here still. This is what the sample file looks like. It's got a link to the docs in here. There's a demo, and you can play around with it, experiment. So here's admin, basic, and a manager. And then you can select, here's 3 different people, Joe Bob, and he's basic. Charles is admin. Eric, who co-authored this module with us, is the manager. So if I select Charles as the user, and I can add some overrides. So you can do all of the you can test all the functionality here. So Charles is a member of the admin group, and I run the ham setup that produces the flattened object that we test against. Now, if I wanted to test one of these privileges, retries allowed. So let's go retries allowed and run the ham, and it comes back as 3, right? Because retried allowed, or actually let's look at something that has a sum in it. Retries, actually retries has a maximum number. So that's interesting. So there's underscore max, but there's also underscore sum. So let me try one that has some sums. Driving allowance. Right, managers get more money. So let's see what Charles is. Driving allowance is at 7, right? My driving allowance, you notice there's no 7s over here though, but Charles is an admin, and an admin inherits the manager, and the manager gets 4 for their driving allowance, but the basic user gets 3 for their driving allowance. All right, does that make sense? Too fast, too slow?
Yes.
Okay. One yes is pretty much everybody, right? It's unanimous. And that's the main concept. So download the file. You can get it away. You can get it from our GitHub, which is right here. And if you Google Delfs FM ham, you'll find it. And there's a function, actually there's separate functions, but here's the file here. You can download that from, there's a button over, where is it here? I don't know, there's a button here somewhere. I think actually click on this link and then you can download it from under here. I think it's here. I don't know, somewhere you can find it. I always find it a pain in the butt to figure out where to download the files, but you can find it in here. And there's instructions here on how to use it as well. We do have some recommendations that we found that work well, mainly in the naming of your groups. Don't pick something like enabled, disabled, account disabled. Like account disabled, is that true when their account is disabled? I think so, but maybe it's false. Maybe some people might it's maybe ambiguous. So is active, make them more definitive or explicit. Is disabled, can access this, count of widgets, those kinds of things. Use those kinds of names and you won't run into any problems. Here's some information. Get day of week equals 2. Here's one for here. This person's allowed to edit rooms only on the 2nd day of the week. And information on the configs and the encryption we use. You're welcome to take apart the custom function. It's pretty well written and it's pretty solid. And to know, because this is related to security things, we have also built a test suite for it. So here's what that looks like if I click on that. It's a spinning beach ball. Some stuff is happening. All right, so here's how we go through. It has a total of 24 tests, and the tests test all the different functionality. And you can see here's the test objects, and here's how, if you're ever looking to make more robust custom functions, it's a takeaway you can have. But basically, here's the initial object and what it's testing for, and then the expected result and the actual result. And we go through and it tests a whole bunch of things like key is not a proper JSON object, and this key doesn't exist, and it tries to fail in a safe manner, right, when things go wrong. So if you want to contribute to it, we do welcome contributions. We won't accept all of them because it's really important that your contribution, like if somebody comes up and says, hey, can you add a thing in for sales department budget? And so that's like hard coded in, that would not make any sense to add, so we wouldn't add that in. But if there's a special feature, or if you just find a bug, by all means, please do let us know. And that's ham. Any questions about that so far? Okay, I'm going to pause our recording here for the end of our, because we're pretty much out of time, but we'll kick around if anybody's got any questions and everything. Once again, guys, thank you. We'll see you next month. And we're going to continue. If you like the idea of the technique corners and that kind of stuff, little snippets of techniques, let us know so we can keep doing that.